And welcome to Last Week On, the podcast where we take our favorite TV shows, movies, just everything, and we go back through them. My name is Adam Strawn, and I am joined again by the one and only Mr. Joey Dean. How are you doing, Joey?
Hello, I'm doing great. It's a nice day to talk about infected fungus people. Always pumped for this.
I'm always ready for this. Always in the mood to talk about the dead. But
Yes.
yeah, this time we are covering episode 4, which weird title. So please hold to my hand, which I thought was interesting. Apparently, it's song lyrics as well. But yeah, this episode now. This one's much more, compared to the last one, this is much more of kind of a straightforward episode, right? Where, the last one we were kind of sitting with two characters for all of it. There was a lot of themes, there was a lot of metaphor, there was all of this going on. Whereas I think watching this episode, two of the major things that jumped out for me is there's a theme of innocence, kind of losing innocence and where innocence still is there. But also we have a sense of humanity as well, how people have become dehumanized and when people get their humanity back as well. Those are the two kind of major things that I felt are the major kind of overarching themes of this episode. What about you, Joey?
Oh, you said it, man. I wrote Death of Innocence.
Hey!
That this is a setup for obviously the continuation in the next episode, but with a lot of the imagery that's used in both, and I might bring up some things that are in episode 5, right? In the next episode. And I want to reference them to affirm some things now that we're kind of able to watch it in hindsight. We're not watching as we go. We're a little bit ahead in real time. We're recording these a little bit behind. So we're able to paint, I think, a more three-dimensional picture of some stuff, and with some references in episode 5 that are exploring a deeper communication of things that are set up in this episode. I was like, oh yeah, Death of Innocence. This is absolutely what we're exploring here. 100%.
Yeah, cool. All right. Yeah, we're in sync there. I love that.
Yeah.
All right. So let's dive straight in. So straight away, talking about loss of innocence, the way the episode opens.
Yeah.
So we have Ellie, who obviously she picked up the gun from the last episode, which was Frank's gun that he had in the dresser. She's then pointing that gun at herself in a mirror. Now, I mean, if that isn't slapping you in the face for the loss of innocence, I don't know what is, because literally. Yeah. But I love all of this where, this is kind of fun to her, right? She's having fun. She's pointing a gun. And it's like violence equals fun, like in a sense. She's seeing herself differently here. She's imagining herself being this kind of violent character. And we've had hints of this all the way through when episode 1, when Joel's beating the guard to death and like Ellie leans forward and starts watching. She's always asking Joel questions about what he's been up to. And, we're really starting to lean into this now where it's this power, right? That she's never had before. She's had we know that Ellie's got a past, if she's hiding something. You and I as gamers know what's going on there, Joey, but in the TV series, we know that there's more to Ellie, and we kind of get drips of that through this episode as well. But here in particular, it's this sense of power, right? She's got this gun. Joel doesn't know that she has the gun, and she's having fun with the thought of, I'm looking in the mirror now, I'm seeing myself holding a gun. I can be violent in this moment, and the innocence is just gone from a child holding a gun.
Absolutely. I mean, to start off with, obviously we've been setting up this relationship with Ellie and guns for a few episodes now.
Yeah.
And that power struggle that you're talking about, how the first episode, just comparing her reaction to Sarah being more innocent and more of a child, and Ellie not having the same response around the same age. We know Ellie's she's a different creature. She's born within the apocalypse. So she has a different relationship with proper social etiquette, and obviously she has a backstory to explore more of that. But the fact that she's pointing it in the mirror, I think a lot of Ellie's actions throughout the show are Ellie's undoing of herself. And obviously it's a hardening that happens as a result of the world, but it's her specific actions and behaviors, and some of them we've already seen, that will kind of kill her innocence for her. So her innocence in some way is going to be dismantled by her own actions. So it's this almost like, I don't want to say self-sabotage, because I think the world would do it no matter what, would redefine her relationship with her innocence. But the fact that she's pointing the gun at herself, I think, is really indicative of the story that's going to be told. And
yeah.
Another thing that I loved about this is there are a lot of bathroom scenes in the game in which you escape into bathrooms to pick up supplies. And I think they really captured the essence of the game. A lot in this episode made me feel like I was playing the game again. And this was a small little detail, but I enjoyed it. And I felt like I was playing the game and I liked it.
Yep, absolutely. And there's a lot of moments which are referential to the games in this episode in
Mm,
particular. Some of them are shot for shot as well, which is interesting. But yeah, well, obviously we'll point them out as we go through.
yep.
But yeah, so then they go outside. Obviously, Joel is siphoning the fuel from the vehicles. I like that Ellie asks him how it works. He tries to kind of blab his way through it and then has actually, she's like, you don't know. And he's like, he just hasn't got a clue. And it's this referencing back to the fact that Joel isn't the smartest person in the world. And I love that we keep coming back to this all the time. But it was nice, like a nice little moment of, and the fact that, this was mentioned as well in the previous episode about siphoning fuel out of vehicles to then keep them going on the road. So he's kind of learning, but doesn't understand how it works, just that he has to do it, which is interesting. That's an interesting overall for Joel as well, which we'll always come back to. And again, like, a little bit of that conversation here where Ellie starts mentioning about the previous world, like so the time before she was alive, like before all of this happened, she keeps mentioning about cars. She mentions about, I'd like to have seen a tank. And there's always this interest in the previous world from Ellie, like the last episode when they saw the airplane and Joel was like, oh, you pay like however much to sit in the middle seat with a shitty sandwich. And then Ellie's like, oh, well, you got to go up in the sky. Joel's really cynical, right? He's really cynical of that past world, of the past life. And I guess a lot of it is, he lost a lot of himself in that past. Since Sarah died, that was the end of that life for him. And like, I guess it's the appreciation of time and that people didn't appreciate what they had at that time. And I think that's a lot of what Joel leans into. Like he had Sarah, but he was always working. He was always out, right? He was coming back late. He didn't spend like the greatest amount of time with her sometimes. And I guess once that's gone from you and the loss is there, that loss of appreciation for him, where it's like, oh, like that time is gone now. I want to move on, forget that. Here we are right now. And I think these conversations elevate that.
Absolutely. It's almost like Joel is, I don't want to say rediscovering his innocence, but he's building a relationship with who he was prior to this world. And I think
Mm,
Ellie is extracting that from him in many ways. I wrote down some moments in this episode in which we see Joel softening
yeah.
more. And we did talk about that a little bit in the first episode when his body language changed. But now we're seeing it pretty consistent in that he's taking on this fatherly instinct toward Ellie. And it's bringing out something that existed prior to this world. So as Ellie is learning about this world, it's almost like Joel is unlearning this world a little bit. He's unlearning the walls that he built up around himself to
Mm,
survive this world. He's developing a relationship with a little bit of himself that was former and was prior. And I'm sure he blocked off a lot of that trauma from losing Sarah, and the fact that Ellie is a young person, a young girl that he's taking care of, is probably the first time he's been able to have some muscle memory from who he was when he was a father. So
mm.
there is a little bit of this kind of flip conversation that's happening as Ellie is growing away from innocence. Joel is in some form rediscovering it. I also really liked when Ellie's talking about the trucks. This was a foreshadow moment that I didn't even pick up on until rewatching, but when they're approaching Kansas City, Joel is explaining that they had these trucks with these things on the front of them that would kind of plow through the cars and remove them to make room for the tanks. And we
Yeah.
actually see this come back twice in this episode arc, in which in this episode, we see one that has the words run on it. And then
Hmm.
in the second episode, when we have that relationship with the bloater coming out, right before that, when they're kind of plowing their way through the town to get to Joel and Ellie and Henry and Sam, we see that truck. So I thought it was a
Yeah.
nice foreshadow that they talked about it for just a second.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And this show does a lot of great foreshadowing. It really, really does. Even the opening of this episode is foreshadowing to how the episode ends, with a child with a gun. And it does
Mm-hmm.
this really well, where it's like subtle detail that pays off later on. And obviously,
Mm-hmm.
Craig Mason and Neil Druckmann both said it's the little details in this show you have to pay attention to, like what Bill said, because they do pay off. They are important. And I think the show does it so well. But yeah, I mean, like Joel as well, like picking up a little bit of what you were saying, Joey, is that Joel, I mean, we'll talk about this in moments when it happens as well, but that kind of innocence coming back to Joel is kind of through Ellie a little bit as well, where he's starting to break down, seeing her less as cargo and more of a daughter figure. And that starts to come through, and especially, well, in moments that we talk about. But yeah, the book of puns, right? What Ellie has.
Yes.
So as we
Yes.
know in the game, in the DLC, this is the book that Riley gives her. However,
Mm-hmm.
she kind of discovers it here. Now, you know, these are dad jokes. We've heard these jokes before. It's the kind of, you pull a Christmas cracker and it's the joke that's inside in England. Like your dad tells these jokes and it's like you laugh because of that shit. Like that's why you laugh. But I love that, we get this introduction of this and it kind of comes back in like several times where Ellie's telling really shit jokes, like in the car. And then, all of this. I love a shit pun. So like for me, it just made me laugh when Ellie was telling them and her reaction to them as well. And Joel just being like, trying to shut it down, but he knows he can't because as time goes on, even he starts to laugh.
Yeah, the comic relief is really nice, and
Yeah.
it really sets up Joel's character that he's really trying not to laugh.
Yeah.
He's trying to be tough. So
Mm-hmm.
Ellie is really getting to him, and she's helping break down his walls by normalizing, because the innocence that she has still is something that Joel hasn't had access to.
Yeah.
He's simply been on survival modes. He's simply been shut off. And so even a little dad joke that we experience at the end of this episode specifically that kind of breaks through allows him to really become in touch with that former Joel,
Right.
which I thought is nice and sweet. And obviously, as we'll learn as the show progresses, does strengthen his relationship with Ellie
Mm.
and kind of define some actions that are taken on later.
Yeah.
Another thing, a small detail, since you brought up small details, that I thought was
Hello.
really cute was, so when they're driving past one of the signs, it's a gas station that we have in the States here called Love's. And they're
Okay.
pretty much all over the place. It's like this yellow sign with like a heart. And then right underneath that sign, they had an Arby's sign. And it took me back
Nice.
to when Frank and Bill met and they make the Arby's joke reference, but it's right beneath the Love's gas station sign, because obviously this could have
Great.
been like any gas station, but they chose a Love's and Arby's, so I thought it was a nice like harkening back to the Bill and Frank episode.
Great observation. I love that. I totally missed
Yeah.
that actually. That's fantastic. Um, yeah, so obviously they're in the truck now, they're driving along. Like Ellie she finds a cassette that she puts on. It's a song called Alone and Forsaken by Hank Williams. It's actually from the 50s, so it actually sits outside of the radio codes, which is interesting. Obviously, Ellie's like pulling his leg, saying, "Oh, is this like
Mhm.
take you back?" And he's like, "Well, actually, this is before my time. This is all from the video
Mhm.
game, all of this." So like Ellie finding the porn mag as well. Like all of those lines lifted when she's like,
Yes.
how does he walk around with that thing? All of this is absolutely lifted from the game. And I love as well when she's like, the way Bella Ramsey says this line, it's fantastic when, they say like, why are all the pages stuck together? It's exactly the way that Ellie says it in the game. And then Joel tries to, he's like, and he's like, I'm just fucking with you and like hits him with it. I love this dynamic because we haven't seen this from them yet. We've seen them be scared. But we haven't seen this where, Ellie's kind of like pulling his leg and she's starting to break down, starting to get into the humanity of Joel. And it's moments like this that really start to crack that down. And I just love it. I love this because it was just so referential to the game. It was exactly the same, even throwing it out the window. It was just spot on.
Yeah, I love that you just said about the 50s. Observing that it's outside the code, because the
Yeah.
code is some like like infrastructure, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
something of this post-apocalyptic world that has been developed to communicate, and the 50s brings us before then. So it's
Yes.
this like kind of again harkening back to what existed before,
Mm-hmm.
and this idea that Ellie is kind of breaking down Joel, and Joel is returning to this way of being that existed prior to the apocalypse. Having a song outside the code from before the code would be really perfect for
Yeah.
that metaphor. And another thing that Ellie does here, which I thought was really powerful, that has to do with that kind of innocence conversation that we're talking about, and the returning to something or the letting go of something. When she's like so excited to learn about the tanks, but then she sees them
Mm.
and she's just so like, oh,
Yeah.
this is actually really sad.
That goes on where Ellie has like more realizations like that throughout the show as well. And it's really interesting how we see those moments of that kind of disappear from her as well. And then other things develop with Ellie as well, which is fascinating. So
Yeah.
good. But yeah, so obviously they are driving for a while. Then Joel decides, like, look, we're going to pull over, we're going to set up camp. This is all added for the TV show. This obviously doesn't happen in the game. They're obviously eating rations of Bill's food. And then I like straight away where Ellie, is like, oh, can we start a fire? And then Joel's like, why am I going to tell you no? He's like, remember what I've taught you. And there are a few lessons that he does teach her in this episode. We see later on with the gun and everything like that. But, he is highlighting again the danger of people. And we had this in the last episode as well when it opened, when Ellie and Joel were walking along the road, that we couldn't see any infected. We don't see any infected in this episode. This is a people episode. And again, this is highlighting that where, he says, like, I'm not looking out for infected. There's going to be none out here. I'm looking for people. And then we get this again here. It's like, look, if we send smoke up into the air, that will attract people. And then Ellie's like, oh, like, what are they going to do? And he says, they'll do more than rob us. And that's such an underlining, especially when you look at the second game as well, how we get the different groups of people in that game and how dangerous some of them really are. And yeah, I just thought I love that because the payoff comes when we see Kathleen and her group, and then especially into the, episode 5 as well.
Yeah. I think that the more we're talking about it, the more reference ends up getting to this death of innocence, because obviously this is part of that conversation too.
Yeah.
The idea that the way Ellie perceives the world is just not the way the world is. And that is another conversation that her and Joel have in the car later on. And here at this camping moment, she again is showing interest about, he can't hear out of his right ear. And she's asking, how did that happen? Did you get shot at? There's something in her that's romanticizing this power, it's cool to be attacked or to beat someone in an attack. She says another episode, how'd you get that scar in your face? Were you shot at? I mean, this repetitive conversation, this infatuation that she has, and the way that she kind of smells the gun in the beginning of the episode as she's kind of toying with it in the mirror, and she pulls the trigger just so she can feel that power. This episode, she's gonna completely have a different outlook by the end of this episode on what actual conflict looks like and how it's not as fun as she is thinking.
And I like that you brought up like the fact that Joel doesn't hear well from his right ear. We kind of get when they're laying down their sleeping bags, Ellie's shouting over to Joel and he can't hear her initially. He's like, what? And like we get that later on as well when she's shouting at him later on when he's putting glass on the ground. And again, it's kind of emphasizing it's moments like this which is humanizing him. Things like this would happen where you've been doing the things that Joel's been doing, like going back to that famous line from Tess, we're not good people. We get a reference to that again when Joel has this conversation later on about how he knew the man was a setup. They've done things and it's had an effect on Joel, both physically, but also mentally. And I think it's really important to emphasize stuff like that. But yeah, like they're laying down again, they're going to sleep, the sleeping bags. I love again that, Ellie returns back to the puns book. Why did the scarecrow get an award? And then I love that Joel answers the pun perfectly. And like, she's like, you fucker. And like the moment but as he rolls back around, he has that smallest of smile on his face. And as I said, this is the start of the Joel and Ellie relationship where he's starting to let his barriers down with her, where he's starting to see, as I say, less as cargo, and he's allowing himself to kind of feel that again, enjoy that, that relationship that he had with his daughter, Sarah, that's starting to break down. He's starting to see her as this young girl that he's building this connection with, that he's becoming a father figure to. He's teaching her stuff through this episode. They're sharing a laugh together. And this is so important for Joel because we're really starting to see this new side of him blossom. And then we get obviously the big payoff of this right at the very end of the game, which I'm guessing we'll get at the end of the TV series as well. But I just love that little smile that Pedro Pascal has as he leans over. It's just perfect.
Yeah, it takes me a little bit back to the line that Bill says to Frank in episode 3 that I wasn't afraid until you showed up.
Yeah.
Because in that same dynamic, what Bill always wanted was this romantic love. And he got that with Frank. What Joel wants as somewhat of a mirror to Bill is that relationship with his daughter again. And he can't ever have that. But Ellie is the closest thing. And so he has this tough shell to get through and to survive. But now we're seeing it soften. And it actually is, it's maybe going to get him into some trouble. And in this episode particularly, we see when he has that exchange with the fight, which we'll talk about soon, he kind of, like, whether realizing it or not, or consciously or subconsciously, he does kind of let his guard down, or he's not as keen or as swift or as quick to defend himself, and it gets him into trouble. But I would imagine part of that is the fact that he's defending someone that he cares about, that he wants to protect, as opposed to simply himself.
Right. And the fact is, when he's been in these scraps before, he's been in that with other adults who know how to take care of themselves, with Tess and with Tommy and everything, like Marlene, which we got referenced to very shortly. But yeah, it's like, as you said, this is a different type of taking care of somebody now. She relies on you like Sarah relied on you. And it's really interesting that we're starting to build that dynamic up again with Joel. But yeah, so then they pack everything away. I love the reference to, like Ellie tries coffee, she like spits it out and like, says, even when they get in the car, she says it smells like burnt shit and like asks about like Star. I just love that line because it can be accurate. Sometimes coffee does smell like burnt shit. But again, the reference to when she asks about Starbucks and like, you mentions, oh yeah, like in the Federal Base, like we did have Starbucks. It kind of did taste like this. Not as, this doesn't taste as good, but yeah. Ellie's looking at the map. She's kind of saying like, we've still got all this time to go. And she's starting to ask Joel about Tommy. She's really so inquisitive. She wants to know more about this man that, for all intents and purposes, is just there to transport her somewhere. But Ellie's like, no, I want to get to know you. I want to learn from you. And at first, Joel's a bit hesitant, but she's persistent. She's like, we've got what, 25 hours or whatever it is, she says. And he's like, okay. And then we kind of, as the viewer, we learn a little bit more about Tommy and why he means so much to Joel. Yes, I know it's his brother, but what else has he been through? And, he kind of says, look, okay, so, Tommy, like he was a joiner. He always joined causes. He joined the army. He was shipped off to Desert Storm. And he says that line, which is really important, is that the army didn't make him feel like a hero. And I think that was a really, really important line. And the themes that kind of drip from that are really, really interesting. He obviously goes on to say, like, he then like left the army. He convinced me to join a group. That's where I met Tess. Then we met Marlene. She talked to Tommy into joining the Fireflies. And then we're getting kind of a lot of strings attaching here where we're like, right, that's how Joel knew who Marlene was. That's how like Tommy kind of ties into this. Tess was part of this group. That's how she knew who Marlene was when they met up in the corridor in episode 1. We're starting to like attach a lot of kind of threads together here. And I really, really like that. And again, we're getting his mission statement here, which is like, look, Tommy quit them and now he's out there on his own and I need to go and find him. This really leans into themes about Joel where he puts his belief in people, not in causes. So like in, what is it, episode 1 or episode 2, when it's episode 1, when the guy comes up to him and says, if you find yourself in the dark, and he's like, if you tell me to join the Fireflies, I'll fucking kill you. Like, Joel doesn't believe in causes. Family is what's important to him. And he even says that, when Ellie says, if you don't think there's hope for the world, why bother going on? And he says, you keep going for family. And then she says, I'm not family. And he says, no, you're cargo. And that's so important. And like this right now, he's doing this for Tess. He says, I made a promise to Tess. I'm doing this because we're going this way because I want to meet up with Tommy. He believes in people. And I think that's a really, really interesting part of Joel.
Yeah, I like the friction here with the idea of hope, which I believe Ellie represents or wants to represent.
Yeah.
And as we'll see, she's gonna want to represent that the more the story unfolds. And reality, or the reality that Joel knows. And so he calls the Fireflies and their missions a pipe dream, which is kind of remotely insulting to Ellie, who is the cargo that she is part of that pipe dream. So he's completely devaluing her existence. After the instance with, we'll see in episode 5, we really see at the conclusion of that episode how Ellie really wants to be the cure. There's something in her where she feels like she has something, especially the more she loses that innocence and develops a relationship with this world. She's going to want to maybe save it. And I also find it interesting that we see this conversation about saving the world here, in which Joel is talking about Tommy and how he's kind of categorizing him as silly for wanting to save the world. And I think that this is going to come back up, if it's anything like the game, in which there's going to be that saving the world hope and the friction of reality and not accessing a new world, but keeping things the way that they are. The friction of those two sides is going to come forward, and it's being explored in the topic a little here. I also love when he talks about his relationship with Tommy. He says that whole crew, for what it was, it worked.
Yeah.
And he's planting the seed that he did some bad things, which we see again as we see explored again
Mm.
as we go into Kansas City and he has that exchange with the people, and he can kind of gather what they're doing and how they're being disingenuous about wanting to be saved.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, really interesting point that you brought up there about the idea, this being a hero. Like Joel himself couldn't save his own daughter. So the thought of
Mm.
that is gone, right? That's gone. He can't be a hero anymore. Joel just does what has to be done. And
Yep.
that's when he joined up with Tess. Like, he's smuggling. He was doing just what had to be done to get by. It's not about being a hero. And it's very kind of that gray area where Joel sits in at this point where, again, he's not here to save Ellie. He's here to get a job done. That starts to develop as it goes on. So yeah, it's a fantastic point there, Joey. I like the point there as well when he's like, oh, you should get some sleep. She's like, I'm not even tired. And then it cuts to her literally passed out, mouth open. Like
So cute.
just so cute. I love that we're bringing the humor and like the lightness of like back into the series as well. After we've had some, especially after episode 3, dear God, all the emotions. But yeah, it's really nice that they're bringing this back into the show. And the game very much has a lot of this, and a lot of it comes from Ellie as well. Again, it's that innocence of not seeing the world so horrible, but just having fun where you can in the way that a child would. And I love that. I love that we get these moments. So yeah, they're driving along. Obviously, they approach this massive traffic jam, obviously going under the tunnel. Like Joel even gets out, he kind of looks through the gap and he's like, yeah, there's no way, but it looks clear the rest of the road as he goes through. And he's like, right, we're gonna have to go around. So then they drive around and they end up in this city. Now, I love the little details again here, Joey. I don't know if you picked up on this, but as they're going along the road on the side, we see a cinema, and one of the films that was showing is Underworld, the first one
Yep.
from 2003. Love
Mm-hmm.
that. Such a great reference.
And then
Um,
it was I actually didn't
Matchstick
write
Man.
these down. Matchstick Men, and then they cut to
Mm,
a pile of dead bodies that were
yeah.
burned.
Yes. And
That
I
was
mean,
interesting.
fantastic. I mean, if you look at those two films as well, like Matchstick Man, that's Nicolas Cage, like who has a relationship with his daughter that he's kind of rebuilding back in that film. Underworld, you have literal
Give
people
us the
like
references.
I know, right? And then Underworld, you've literally got like, creatures fighting against each other as well, which, is a big reference point of The Last of Us. So it's so interesting that we get those two films specifically from that year as well. And can we just say Underworld as well? Outright banger. Love that movie.
So good.
Yeah, first and second one, yes, solids. Um, but yeah, they drive past the burnt bodies and then they notice the Q. Like even Ellie says, "Wait, is that the QZ?" And they stop and look, and it's completely empty. The doors are bust open. There's nobody there. That's a sign of trouble for Joel. Straight away, he's thinking, "Shit! Like if there's nobody there, like what's going on?" Then this is the video game coming in. The man appears in the road, trying to flag them down. Pretending that he's injured. And straight away, Joel's like, no, seatbelt on. He's like, no, no, we're driving, we're going. And even she says, like, he's injured. Should we try and help him? He's like, no. Obviously, they then drive around the guy. This is when things get tense, right? When there's like a brick thrown on the window, the tires get burst from like this nail track that they obviously go over. And like, it's just tension. I think this was filmed fantastically where they're rocking around in the car and then obviously they crash into this. I think you guys call it a laundromat. We call it a laundrette in the UK. But they crash straight into that. And that's literally all like for like in the game. And we get a big shootout here as well. Now, interesting straight away, like they get out of the car. And what I like about this is that in the game, we sit with the shootout, right? Like, because we're playing that point. But Joel says to Ellie, look, there's that hole over there in the wall. I want you to go through there. They won't hit you. I'll cover you. Don't worry. Just go. And then obviously he gets his rifle. He starts shooting the guys. Ellie crawls through this. Now, for the majority of the shootout, we see Joel shoot one of the men, but we sit with Ellie and we kind of hear the shootout and we kind of sit with Ellie and her response to that. And I think that's really interesting. The fact that, it's kind of referencing again that The Last of Us isn't all about shooty, shooty, zombie, zombie, bang, bang. It's about the characters and their response and their growth in this game. And I think that was really interesting that for a lot of this, we do sit with Ellie. And it kind of references as well that we talk about that lack of like heroes in the world. Ellie has to stand up at this point and become a hero to save Joel.
Yeah, I loved this part of the game because the show, because it was not only so congruent with the game,
Mm.
but it explored a lot of that audio engineering that we haven't
Yes.
spoken too much about, but we did touch on in the first episode, how the lines that the opponents would be shouting were probably word for word what they were said in the game, but the audio quality of them was identical. The
Yeah.
gunshots identical to the game. The idea
Mm.
of needing to climb through something, and even after this is all said and done, she has to move something away from the door, very much like
Mm.
the game. I love the look that they give each other here. He just through, few words go through the hole in the wall. He looks at her, she's scared, and he just reassures her. It reminds me of when they're dealing with the clickers and they have the first moment together, and he is taking care of her and protecting her.
Mm.
And there's another moment in this when he offers his apology and he says, "We're going to get through this." And she says, "I know," which was
Mm.
such a nice evolution from earlier on when she asks him in an earlier episode, "Are we going to be okay? Or are we going to get through this?" Something along those lines. So it came full
Yeah.
circle there. So now we're kind of that arc of that emotional dynamic has passed. I think this is the beginning of Ellie truly trusting Joel, especially after she's romanticized firearms and the power that's associated with them. And for the first time, um, or at least to the first time in this type of situation, as we see, she experiences what it's actually like to have to do
Yes.
that to somebody, especially someone who's so young.
Mm.
And she kind of passes that permission to Joel to say, "I am going to trust in you." And I think we see that kind of conversation come full circle here for a reason.
Yeah.
Um, and it is that experience that Ellie is internally processing as she has her back to the wall and we're hearing all the conflict going on. That processing is what propels their relationship into a new phase in which
Yeah.
Ellie is ready and willing to listen and follow Joel's orders and stop being so innocent and naive toward a lot of the stuff that they've been experiencing so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we get that here when, Joel has a surprise attack from this guy, then wrestles him to the ground. He's then in the video game, the guy's drowning him, but then, nice like difference here when he's obviously got the
Yeah.
gun, the rifle to Joel's neck, he's suffocating him. And then this is the point where we kind of go back to this kind of heroes, this moment of, oh, Ellie's like, oh, I know now this is my moment. I've got my gun. I've got the power here to help Joel. I'm going to go and do this. We kind of reference back to that in the opening scene when, she's got this gun pointing at herself in the mirror. It's like, yeah, I've got this gun. This is fucking cool. And then in the moment she crawls through that and obviously shoots the guy in the back, Bella Ramsey's acting here is just impeccable. It's incredibly done where, Ellie shoots the guy and then we hear him flop. And then straight away we get this is the humanizing and dehumanizing moment where the guy he's pleading with them. He's trying to humanize. He's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Look, like, take me back. Like, my mom just lives over here. She's not too far. Well, I'll never say anything. Look, my name's this. What's your name? He's pleading with him, and Joel says nothing. He's just looking, and Ellie doesn't say anything either. And then Joel obviously sees her, takes the gun, takes that power back from Ellie, takes the gun now. And then, he even throws out the knife. He's like, look, this guy who's been shot, you like this knife? Look, you can take my knife. There it is. And then he just says, look, go back behind the wall. And it's that realization of, what's going to happen here and you shouldn't be seeing this. And that it's everything that all of that innocence again with Ellie thinking, oh yeah, I've got a gun. This is really fucking cool. All of that is gone because of the realization of what you said, Joey, of what she actually has to do and the effect that has on you. It's kind of she now understands Joel a lot more. She kind of understands why he's so kind of stoic because he's had to go through this. And as you said later on, she asks him about if he's had to kill people. Have you ever killed innocent people? And it kind of references back to this moment when Ellie goes through the wall. And then I love again that we hear it, but Bella Ramsey's acting when we see Ellie just crying against the wall. It's that realization, oh my God, I've just killed someone. And we know as gamers, this isn't the first time Ellie's had to kill somebody. And we get this conversation later on as well, which she doesn't want to go into, but she does mention it to Joel. But I just loved this. This for me was such an important character beat for both Joel and Ellie.
Yeah, I think this is also another reference to that death of innocence, not just in Ellie's transformation through this experience, but the fact that this is a very young person who has
Yeah.
to die. And I knew as soon as Joel had that knife in his hand, I knew he was going to use it because he's going to save the bullets, right? Like that's the
Mm.
right thing to do, especially
Yep.
when you're in the game and you're rationing things. You have to make those decisions in the game.
Great point.
I also wonder if obviously this guy can't walk
Mm.
and he's not going to go anywhere. So Joel's, putting him out of his misery. But also if they were to leave him there then Ellie is the one who had dealt that final blow, if you will.
Mm.
And
Right.
Joel instead maybe makes this decision to kill him so that he doesn't have to make Ellie responsible to have that on her, because it's already weighing on her. But if he dealt the finishing blow, then she has less to blame herself for.
Yeah.
Um, I like the conversation of the hero ideology that Ellie is navigating this world with, this very innocent idea, because we see that explored in the game. We see that she is obsessed with things like comic books, which we see in the next episode. She plays Mortal Kombat in the beginning of episode 3. So another,
Right.
I can never say this word. Oh my gosh. Fetishization of the kind of hero dynamic. Obviously, Joel now spoke about Tommy wanting to be a hero. And we also have Ellie in the game, who collects, especially in the second game, collects these trading cards,
Mm.
and they kind of become a huge component in the game as like
Right.
a side quest, if you will. But they're all these heroes. So there's this conversation about like, what is a hero and how can we save people? Is it through power? Is it through sacrifice? And I think Ellie herself is going to go through the motions of what defines a hero. How can she show up as a hero? And
Mm.
you will learn how that plays out. But I think this is another exploration of that hero dynamic for sure.
Absolutely. And it's nice because it is an exploration of innocence as well. And it's perfectly just juxtaposed with when we see Sam, like when we meet Sam and obviously the drones that Sam has of like heroes. He draws him and his brother as heroes with capes and everything like
Yep.
that. And still has that belief that they can be heroic in this, awful world. It's so nicely played out between the pair of them, how Ellie's starting to learn and grow, about what that means to be a hero, as you said, where she's still got this much younger child who still believes in that. And when in episode 5, when they do meet and Ellie kind of references that, and kind of sees the difference with, how they both look at that concept, which is a really, really fascinating. But yeah, then obviously Joel says, "Look, we're gonna have to get up to higher ground. Let's move on because they'll come and find us." And obviously we see the truck kind of pile on the street later on. Now, this, we get our introduction. She's the leader of this group. So it's like the big revolution that they had. They overthrew Fedra. Now they kind of run the city. She's interrogating a doctor. But I need to ask you, Joey, what are your thoughts on Kathleen, this character which was not in the game, but was added into the TV show?
In the game, a lot of the people we see, a lot of the people we avoid or engage with, and as the second game has a bigger relationship and the storyline in the second game is much more dense and it's much longer than in the first game,
Mm.
we see more of these archetypes of people who pop up in different forms. And I actually thought that Kathleen, looks a lot like some of the characters that are in the game. So I think that the characterization of her is pretty spot on.
Yeah.
My first instinct, I didn't love her too much, and I wonder if that was intentional, that she was meant to kind of disturb the character types that were in the show so far. We don't She seems a little I don't want to say soft, but there's a
Mm.
softer quality to her. There's something
Right.
about her that's not as rough and tumble, that's not as a strong, if you will, as another female character we've had a deep relationship with, Tess, who's really tough. And like,
Mm.
Tess could probably fuck Kathleen up.
Oh
She could
yeah.
fuck her
Yeah.
shit up.
Oh yeah.
But Kathleen, we learn more about her storyline, and once we see the full story unfold, I think we realize Kathleen is more of a strategist,
Hmm.
and she has intellectual prowess, and she
Yeah.
has respect and empathy. She has an EQ. She understands people, and she can work them. And I think there's this friction within the actress, and I think she did do a good job of really negotiating how she wanted to, what actions she wanted to do. And you can see
Mm.
she's so calculated. Every single thing she's doing, she's thinking, how is this going to impact the next step? How is what I'm going to do now affect what's going to happen in a day, in a week, in a month? And we see that when she has this interrogation moment with the doctor, and then she goes out, she learns that these people in her community have been killed, and she says, "Do you need a doctor?" And they say no, and then she goes back and she kills him. So she's
Mm.
thinking about her actions. She could have killed him right there, but she probably thought for a second, we might need a doctor, so let's not do that. But then when she's emotional, she she seals the deal. A lot of her character comes from rage. A lot of her character
Yeah.
comes from this revenge mission we learn she's on. So I'm in the middle with her. I didn't love her, but I didn't dislike her. I think she's an appropriate role. And honestly, she's not a central character. So I think her being a bit neutral is important because not every
Mhm.
single character needs to be the most, prominent focal point.
Right. I'm kind of with you. Like, as a character herself, for me, I kind of appreciate more of what she stands for. Kind of like I understand what her drive is the fact that she lost her brother and that he was beaten to death. I completely understand that. And hell, if that was me, I'd probably be exactly the same. I get that. But I think for me, a lot of what she represents is, she pins everything on Henry, right? Everything. Like as you said, when she's interrogating this doctor, she wants to know where Henry is. And then, the bodies were all up outside. She goes out to see them. It's like, is there anything we can do? We've got a doctor. No, and straight away, the first thing she said is, this is Henry. This is what he's done. And what she's really good at doing there is like basically giving everybody there, like it's mob mentality. She's giving everybody a purpose. We have to go and find Henry. That's what we have to do. Because these people have that purpose, they get swept up and they're on board with that. And that's what she's really good at doing is like directing the people of, look, once we find Henry, we are going to fuck shit up. We're going to get this revenge because he's the one that's been split into Fedra. And she even says we're wiping out people that have been telling things to Fedra. We're getting rid of these traitors. It's this getting the people together, getting this mob together and explore with that character. But again, it's this loss of innocence with her. They've got a doctor there, even says, I held you in your arms when you were born, I delivered you. And she's not bothered. She's like, I don't care about that. And like she even says, like, have I satisfied the conditions for you to talk by putting a gun to his head? Humanity in her, that human side is gone. The second her brother died, just like when Joel lost Sarah, that humanity's gone. And it's vengeful from her now. And yeah, I just thought that was really, really interesting. It's the first time we get a mention kind of like Henry. It's like it's pinning that purpose of this group, which she's leading. She's pulling everybody in with her. It's that kind of look, we need to get to Henry. That's our mission. Let's go, go, go. And everything gets put back to Henry. Really kind of quite cleverly as a strategist, as you said.
Yeah, I liked that the doctor's role in her life was emphasized that he was the doctor that delivered her because it takes us immediately to the space of innocence and the transformation of a person and how they can go from this baby being brought into the world innocent to what Kathleen has become. We also see that her relationship with her brother is attached to the idea of innocence and the loss of innocence because we learn about her brother when she's in episode 5 when she's in her childhood bedroom. And so there's this relationship with her brother that has to do with being youthful. And so this ties in a lot of the themes that have been explored so far about innocence. And I also like what you brought up that she kind of rallies the troops, if you will. She kind of manipulates them for her own revenge mission. And I think that's it shines a big light on this world and maybe some commentary to today in which people's misdirected anger is controlled by one person above and funneled into someone or something, when in reality everyone was simply angry at Fedra for what Fedra did, and now we're blaming one singular person for that when they were not Fedra and they were victim to this situation. Even later on in this episode when they go into the attic, Kathleen says Henry's not going to let Sam starve. She knows Henry's intentions. She knows who he is as a person. And she is still seeking out revenge because to her, it's all about the revenge. It's not about who it is that did it or what they might have been going through, but the fact that she just simply wants revenge.
Now, we go back to Joel and Ellie, and they're hiding out in this shop. And this, for me, is probably the most important scene of the entire episode, really, for like the development of their relationship here. And I think it's so interesting where, they mention about when the trucks start going by, then that's when we'll go out into the street and we'll go up to the higher building, which is just over the road. It's Joel saying to Ellie, are you all right? At the moment they crashed into the laundrette, he's like, are you okay? You hurt? Is everything all right? He's always asking Ellie, are you okay? You okay? And this is the first time that we really see then Ellie says to him, are you okay? And Joel's response when he's like, I'm all right. Are you all right? That's so important. Like he's almost dehumanized Ellie to a degree where he sees her as cargo. He's not, and he's been dehumanized himself. He's not used to being asked that question, obviously. But then to ask it back to her as well in this context is so important, because as I said, like he's not good. He even says this. He's like, he tries to comfort her and he's not good at doing that. And he says, you shouldn't have to see this. You shouldn't have to do this. It's my fault, and like you can see he's trying, but this is a struggle for Joel because again, like in the way that he's seen everything with Ellie right now, he's kind of pushed all of the thoughts of her being like this young girl who he's had to look after almost like a father figure. It's been a long, 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 long time since he's probably had these conversations with anyone. The fact that she says this wasn't my first time, like that just lingers so much, where we learn so much from Ellie at that point. Her kind of background's been a mystery for a lot of this at this point. We as gamers obviously know what's happened there, but that look that Joel gives her, that conversation obviously is like a plot point in his head where he's like, no, we're gonna talk about that later on because I need to know what the fuck you've actually done. But yeah, this conversation, Joey, what was your thoughts?
I identified it mostly as another moment of Joel softening, and it takes me back
Yeah.
to episode 1 when we are first introduced to the QZ and we see the child who is infected, and Joel
Mm,
carries his body and throws it into the fire.
right.
That is Joel that we know in the apocalypse who does look at people, even children, as nearly objects. It's people aside from Tess and Tommy are things to use to get what he wants and to move forward. Ellie, for the first time, is the person aside from Tess who is able to break that down. And now Joel is almost giving permission to himself because he's realizing that he is not fully able to protect Ellie. And I think this
Mm,
is bringing up so much trauma from him losing Sarah, and this thing that repeats on him that we see come back in later episodes where he speaks out loud that he's afraid, which then goes back to what Bill says to Frank, I wasn't afraid until you showed up. He is really being broken down, and I think the softening that he displays here is really nice, leading into him finally teaching Ellie how to use the gun, recognizing her
yeah.
as a person, as another, you know, I don't want to say an equal by any means, but as someone who can also fight for herself, fend for herself.
Mm,
She also just saved his life.
yeah.
And there's a little more, I think, to Joel's perception of Ellie at this point. But yeah, I enjoyed this scene, and I liked again the specificity of the world building with the newspapers and the broken down dilapidated shop. It felt very akin to spaces that we enter when we're playing the game.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, I love that you brought up as well, he almost kind of, this is what Ellie's been, the whole time she's been like, can I have a gun? Can I have a gun? This is the first time Joel gives her the gun, and like you see that reaction on Ellie's face when she's almost kind of excited. And it's not the fact of like, oh, I know I killed a man, but now I've got my gun back, ha ha ha. It's more that Joel trusts her now, and like sees that she's capable. As you said, like she just saved his life. And it's that kind of, oh my God, like he trusts me with this weapon now. And like it's almost like, she's filled with joy, the fact that she's kind of won round his trust. He is giving her the gun. We have this in the game as well, where, it's obviously Joel is training Ellie with the rifle, but obviously he's just talking about like her holding the gun and how like, she'll look down the sights and like where to place her fingers and everything like that. And it was just a really nice kind of moment of, I trust you now. I see you as someone that can help. And I thought that was a really nice character beat as well for Ellie. And you can see that on her face as well, especially when the fact that, she doesn't put the gun in her bag, she puts it in her pocket as well. I thought it was a nice little moment there. So yeah, they obviously move out. And then they just move in between buildings, basically. Then we go to Kathleen and her crew again. They're sweeping the streets. They're going between buildings. Obviously, they go up into the hiding place of where Henry and Sam have been. And straight away, as you said earlier on, we see like there's empty tins, drawings. Again, this is almost maintaining innocence where innocence has been lost. Sam's still got that innocence in him where he thinks, he has the superhero kind of eye mask on as a kid. And then, he keeps drawing him and his brother as superheroes. He believes that they can get out of this, that they can save each other. And that's a really interesting point that we get in episode 5 and how that turns out. But yeah, I just love that. We get that line as well. She says, look, he's not going to let Sam starve. They are close. They continue on. They go to the underground section where, her kind of mercenary guy says, look, I want to show you something. They go in, and then I love the foreboding of this because, as you said, Joey, into episode 5, we know how much this means. When the ground's sunken in, they kind of look at it. We then see movement underneath. Straight away, we're thinking bloater, infected, something's going on. And straight away, again, Kathleen, her mission, her statement, she says, look, we'll focus on Henry. Once we find Henry, we'll come back to this. That is all her focus is right now. And to be fair, that thing that's happening right there is probably a lot more important than finding Henry right now. But that doesn't matter to her because she needs to get the revenge for the death of her brother.
Yeah, I don't know how well I can articulate this. And it was like a simmering potential metaphor or idea in juxtaposition of episode 3 with episode 4 and 5. And I don't know if this is going to sound exquisite or silly, but there's almost this different relationship with, I don't want to say suppression versus what's coming up from under the surface, but we see, at least in episode 3, there's so much subterranean imagery in that people hide there.
Yeah.
So we have the bunker, we have Ellie escaping into the basement of the building. We have other references to just things that are happening below. And in this episode, it's the opposite. They're climbing a building to get to the top. Henry and Sam are waiting in attics. And actually, it's what's underneath that is the danger. It's not where we're hiding. It's where the danger is. So I feel like there's something here. And I'm just not like privy enough right now to put it into words. But I don't know if it's just the relationship or the different dynamic of Bill and Frank maybe suppressing something that came up, and that was where they were hiding, and now they're finally, moving away from being subterranean into being present in reality. Whereas so many of these people we see, Joel, Kathleen, these people who are kind of repressing things that already existed, as opposed to Bill, who never got to fully live out his identity. He's now able to kind of rise from what was hidden. Whereas Kathleen, Joel, these people are really pushing it down more. And I don't know if there's a metaphor here with what happens when we bottle up that trauma and that emotion and we don't let it out. Yeah, I don't fully know, but I feel like there's something here, unless it's simply just coincidence. But obviously the direct thing that happens here, it sets us up for what happens in episode 5. And it sets us up in the different type of city that this is, in which the infected aren't running rampant in the town, but instead they are underneath, potentially.
Yeah, it's a good point as well. Like even the way that it moves, like it's kind of like almost like a breath that it's taken, kind of like that breath that we take when we're so pent up with something. And we kind of see that as well with Kathleen, where she's so pent up and so rage-filled at getting revenge that we see how that plays out for her. And yeah, there is an interesting metaphor there as well. There's also the sense of that don't get too comfortable in what you think is safe. Especially we see episode 5 when Joel, Ellie, like Sam and Henry are all underground, like the kids are playing together, they're chatting, it's a safe space. But then juxtaposed with that later on, we see the creatures come out of the ground. What was registered as a safe space isn't always safe. And that's kind of metaphor that leans back into the game as well. Don't ever get too comfortable in a place that you think is safe, because that will turn unsafe very quickly. And obviously, you can lean into that kind of metaphor as well, I guess. But yeah, we return back to Ellie and Joel. They're now across, they're into the building that they need to get to. They need to climb the 45 flights of stairs, which they start doing. And then this conversation again is really important, where, they're going upstairs, and like Ellie says to Joel, how did you know that guy, like that was an ambush when he came out? And he says, oh, I've been on both sides. We've used that tactic before. And then, Ellie says, have you killed innocent people? And I love that Joel doesn't answer her. He just looks at her. And that alone says enough. And again, this is kind of referencing back to that line from Tess in episode 2, we're not good people. And it's kind of re-referencing they have done some shit. This is almost like the redemption of Joel as well, where Tess made it so clear that, by the end of episode 2, Ellie was her redemption. She even says, like, we've done some shit. We've done some horrendous shit, but if we can just help this girl, then this will be redemption. This is us redeeming for everything, all the shitty things that we've done. And I think for this moment, this is Joel kind of reflecting back on that when he's like, yes, I have killed innocent people to get done what I've had to get done. But this redemption that kind of Tess had in you, this is starting to inflict into me now. And you are kind of becoming my redemption as well as a person.
I think this was like the direct reference to the conversation of innocence here.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's explored in some regard, but the fact that the word innocent people is being
Mm,
used is
yes.
so direct. And it's also innocent has two meanings here. Innocence can be something that we associate to youth. Innocence is also something we can associate to people who haven't done wrong. And though it would be contrary to Joel's character, so I do understand why he was silent, I would have really loved a line to really seal the deal here. Something along the lines of Joel saying, "Aren't we all innocent at one point?" Or something to really like get us thinking about Ellie's experience and her transformation. And but Joel's just not a poignant character. He's just someone who communicates with, something a little bit above a caveman's IQ. So um, so yeah, but I think this brings the episode to some remote conclusion in that it's exposition leading into the next episode, but it's really circling back to this idea of innocence. What does it mean? And it's challenging the viewer to think about that as well.
Absolutely. I love the Joey Dean rewrite of the script. Give me more of that, please. Here's what I would have said.
Yeah, I know.
No, I love it. I love it. So yeah, then they obviously continue on. They choose a room to rest in. Joel obviously is, what does he say, like a 57-year-old man. He's like absolutely knackered. And like I love that again. Like Ellie's the one who pulls him up and says, "Come on." And then they go into this room. Again, it's just like an office space, really. They get like the cushions from the chairs and then he lay them down. I love this reference where Joel is spreading the broken glass on the floor in front of the door. Again, reference back to episode 2 with the clickers. It's the glass that set them off. And it's kind of that message there again of, if I put this down, I'll be able to hear something if someone comes in. Again, we have that moment when, Ellie's shouting over to Joel, "What are you doing?" He can't hear her because, again, it's his right ear. So we get this reference back to, he's got that, that problem with his right ear where he can't hear properly. And then again, we have this conversation between them. And this is nice where all the time we've seen, it's like Ellie asking Joel things, like, "Tell me about this, tell me about Tommy, tell me about yourself. Like, what have you done? Have you killed innocent people?" And this is the first time Joel's ever really kind of said to her, apart from in episode 2 when he was asking basic questions of her, like about Fedra school and whatnot. But he says, look, about her hurting people for the first time, when he brings back that point, and she says, she just shuts it down. She's like, "I don't want to talk about it." And then I love this part here when he's like, "Your age, you shouldn't have to deal with this." And she says, "So it gets easier when you get older." And then he just has a beat and he's like, "No, not really." And that is the truth right there. Like that is so prevalent where it's never easy to do the things what Joel has to do. And he just has to do them. Again, it's about keeping on just doing what needs to be done. But I love that point. It's just that, you know, Ellie kind of already knows that. She's kind of saying it to him. She's kind of turning that around by saying, also, you're saying that it's easier when you get older. Is that what you're saying? And he's like, "No, actually, it never ever gets easier. None of us should have to do this." And again, it is that loss of innocence kind of redefining that again. Look, we have to do what we have to do. It's not great. It's not good. That innocence is gone, but we just got to do it because it's kill or be killed.
And it's also proposing the idea of where does innocence exist in this world? Because Ellie, even though she has naivety because she's young and she enjoys youthful things and she likes to make jokes in the apocalypse and she likes comic books and video games and she wants to be a hero and she's romanticizing power and all that stuff is very young-minded. She is someone who's not fully innocent. Her innocence has been taken from her. She said, "I've done this before." So Joel's also negotiating potentially the idea that it doesn't get old, it doesn't get easier, and you shouldn't have to do this. But no one here is innocent. This world is in an innocent world. And so even when you're Ellie's age, you're experiencing and seeing and doing things that would remove innocence to some extent.
Yeah. It's really interesting, that exploration of innocence. And I mean, going back to just maybe half an hour ago, like Ellie did something that wasn't necessarily innocent in name, but she still saved Joel's life. But she had to take another life in doing that. And it's this interesting kind of metaphor of how we view innocence, as you said. And we kind of pin it back to these moments of when people have had to do something which isn't necessarily a good thing, an innocent thing, but it's the thing that's had to be done to survive. And Ellie literally learns that, like, literally by getting involved in that situation because she had to. She had to save Joel. And it was a really interesting exploration of that.
Yeah,
Um,
and also there's a little bit more explored in the next episode, which we could talk more deeply about then. But I spoke about it a little bit with Kathleen's characterization, in which Henry does something seemingly deplorable
right.
for the sake of caring for someone he loves, in the same way that Ellie did something seemingly deplorable for the sake to protect someone she loves. And so it's this idea of what makes us innocent versus not innocent. And I brought this up in a previous episode, but two things can exist simultaneously. We can be not innocent. We can do bad things, but
Mm,
also be good people, or also have positive intentions behind these bad things. And that also is something that's brought up in episode 6 a little bit, with the meeting of Tommy and the exploration of that whole narrative, and the idea of who Joel was
mm,
before meeting Ellie. And it is spoken a little bit about it in this episode too, a few times, in which we're setting up Joel to be not a good person and the things that he did in killing innocent people. But then again, you know, go to my rewrite here. Aren't we all
yes.
innocent at some point? Like, is anyone even innocent anymore?
Mm,
Where is the line drawn, and how is that word defined
yeah.
in an apocalypse?
And again, it kind of poses the question to okay, I'm going to go off on something here. So I'm a drama guy. I've acted all of my life. And there's a play that I was in by a writer called Edward Bond, and it's called The War Plays. It's a dystopian world, and the world's kind of survived after a bombing, right? And there's very few pockets of people left. And they're trying to restore humanity. They're getting jobs again and everything like that. And there's a practitioner called Bertolt Brecht who used to do this all the time. He would put a message in his work and then pose it to the audience to ask them, what would you do? What is the right decision in this scenario? And very briefly, there's a moment when a guy is going for a job. He has a family who is starving. He needs to go and get this job to earn money to then support them. There's a woman's going for a job as well, and part of a building falls and crashes and pins this woman to the ground. And as he's going for the job, he sees it happening. Now, she's more qualified and she would get the job, but yet she's pinned to the ground. He's like, do I leave her and go and get the job so I can support my family? Or do I do the right thing and help her? But what is the right thing in this world? And it reminds me so much of that, where we have this as the viewer, we are posed with this question, what would we do in that situation? And I just find that really fascinating. All works of art that does that, that asks that question of you, what would you do in this situation? And whenever we lean into these little moments in The Last of Us or anything like this, it's really prevalent to put yourself in that position and consider that. Like we've had moments like this, and where we have tough moments where we have to make that decision. It's not necessarily the chaotic good or chaotic evil kind of decision, but what is the right decision for you in that moment? And again, it is take that innocence out of the equation, doing what you have to do to survive. And I think it's a fascinating concept. And it's moments that are littered through The Last of Us that are really prevalent with that.
Yeah. And to piggyback off that briefly, because I can go on a tangent, as we've learned on the pod. I've brought this up a few times, but it's this idea of how do we make decisions in the apocalypse? Sometimes you
Mm,
simply have to make a decision,
yeah,
and survival rests on deciding, not necessarily weighing whether it's right or wrong, because that pause, that hesitation could be your undoing.
yeah,
And so everyone is victim in the apocalypse to making these decisions. Maybe characters like Kathleen, who aren't in immediate danger, who didn't have to in this episode kill the doctor. Maybe
right.
her decision could have been afforded some time. She could have thought, but
Mm,
instead she decided. And maybe that characterizes her as a more villainous type,
mm,
as opposed to Joel, who's simply seeking to survive and has done bad things in pursuit of survival. Yeah, there's definitely a double-edged sword in a lot of this, where it's like, it is a kill or be kill world, and there isn't as much infrastructure for morality. It's just
mm.
about survival.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the game's about that as well. You're making decisions all the time. I've got very few bullets left. Do I save these? Do I use them on what's coming for me now? Like, I've got some health now. Do I need to save that up? You're always making decisions in this world, and that's really important. And that, especially plays into the next couple of episodes as well that we get later on. But yeah, just a fascinating point. I just wanted to discuss with you there, Joey, because I think it's so prevalent for this show. And then just to kind of wrap up here, I love that again we get Joel and Ellie having a proper laugh and a proper giggle for the first time. You know, like Ellie starts asking the puns again. And like Joel just, he lets himself laugh here. He's kind of, they've both found common ground. They've both started to get to know each other a bit more, where Joel realizes she's not just this little innocent girl who is cargo, who's never been spoiled by this world. She's clearly, this isn't her first time that she's had to kill somebody before. They find this common ground. He's seen her differently now. And Ellie's really starting to get to know him now and kind of, trust each other a lot more. And that's really important, that sense of trust now. Joel has never allowed her to have a gun at this point, but now he has. She recognizes that trust that he's putting in her. And she's trusting him as well with her life, like all the way through this. And then the fact that they are just laughing together, he hasn't laughed like this since Daughter, which was so long ago. Like that episode 1 when they're joking on the couch talking about being drug dealers and everything like this. He hasn't had that. We haven't seen that side of him. And I think Joel, in this moment, is just enjoying that time of where they're in this room, they seem to be safe, they're just napping, they're going to go to sleep, and just, you know what, let's just have this moment of innocence where we can just innocently laugh amongst each other and just let everything kind of, we're not like completely letting our guard down, but there's a sense of safety where we are. We can just have a laugh and just enjoy each other's company. She needs that as much as what I need right now because we've been through some shit today. And I just really love that.
Absolutely. And as we see, there's a exploration that happens next that
Mm-hmm.
expands upon something that that you said earlier, which is never get too comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
As
Yeah.
soon as they let that wall down, as soon as they start to act like humans again, they are seemingly in danger. And the episode begins with Ellie pointing a gun at herself, Innocence pointing a gun at Innocence, and essentially it ends the same way with Sam, a child, pointing a gun at Joel this time.
Mm. That's it, because Henry's got a gun pointed at Ellie, right? She wakes him up. And then that's our kind of introduction, very briefly, to Henry and Sam. And then that's it. Episode out. Joey. So, I mean, for me, this episode was a lot more straightforward. It was kind of like more of a, they are moving, but then they get stuck, right? They're in Kansas City now. So it's kind of like they're stagnant in terms of the story, kind of takes a little bit of a break in the city. It's kind of part 1 of part 2, right? These 2 episodes like kind of tie into one another perfectly, where they don't leave the city until right at the very end of it, at the next episode. But for me, this episode allowed to do what the video game can't do, which is those moments of when we can just stop for a second, take a break, and just get to know our characters a little bit better. We get the quieter scenes between Joel and Ellie. Of course, we have a little bit of action pack because, hello, it's The Last of Us. But in the video game, you're constantly moving that character on and on and on. Whereas it's these points where we are seeing the real connection between Ellie and Joel start here. These are like the starts of it now where things are breaking down. They're starting to trust one another. They're really kind of communicating in a way that they've never communicated before with each other. And we're just seeing those characters develop. And I think this episode was really, really important for character development. And obviously those overall themes of innocence and humanizing and dehumanizing as well. But yeah, what were your thoughts, Joey, overall?
I thought that this episode was really powerful in its subtleties.
Mm.
It wasn't extremely fast moving. There were moments of action, but they didn't define the episode. There wasn't the same weight that was on the other episodes, the same edge of your seat, the same friction of survival. And it had moments here, but ultimately we knew Joel and Ellie were going to make it through those moments because otherwise the show would end.
Right.
And so there was less tension. But so a lot of this episode, I think, was just really in the conversation. It was in the acting. It was in the subtle moments that happened along the way. As you said, that we can't really get as much in the game because we're playing the game. This is allowing us to see behind the curtain a little more. And I personally love episodes like that.
Yeah.
I do also see it as a 2-parter. So I see this as kind of one episode that's attached to the next episode. So this is the exposition leading into the next episode. So they kind of are a 2-in-1 for me. But as an episode in and of itself, I very much enjoyed it. I mean, I think everything that's been done so far with The Last of Us, I've been really, really happy about.
Same. Oh my God, same. I'm going to be devastated when it ends because I just love it so much.
Me
And
too.
it's definitely pushing me on to want to play the game all the way through again. And I'm
Yeah.
kind of like, I'm holding off. I'm trying to as much as I can, but I'm like, but maybe when it's over. But yeah, Joey, what would you rate this episode out of 10?
I was floating a little bit between
Mm-hmm.
7 and 8, and
Same.
I am definitely landing on 8,
Yeah.
especially after discussing it, because there was so much explored that I did not pick up on as much the first time through. There were
Mm-hmm.
so many tiny pieces that were set up in passive conversation, down to those large vehicles, those trucks with the plows attached to them, that we see when we are introduced to Kathleen and her squad, and again is introduced at the end of episode 5. Little things that foreshadowed the character dynamic, the history of Joel and Tommy, the fact that it leads us into episode 6. There was a lot set up here that, watching it again, I was able to appreciate more and realize the extent of what they were doing with so little. And for that reason, I can't give it below an 8, because it was pretty exquisite in how well they tied that all together. Even the themes of heroes and the fact that we can have such a deep conversation about an episode that is remotely passive in context to the next. But I also don't feel like I can give it higher than an 8, because of the example that has been set previously with the other episodes that were a
Yeah.
little more powerful in their impact and their takeaway. So yeah, 8 out of 10 for me.
Yeah, I agree. I actually had, 7-7.5-8 question mark on my pad. And it's exactly the same as you. So I remember watching it for the first time. And the first time kind of watching, I was like, oh yeah, it's a 7 out of 10. It's a good episode. It's doing a lot. It's pushing the narrative along. There's some cool things in there, and that's kind of it. But to go back over it and really kind of analyze it in the way that we're doing, and when we talk about it, it really does bring the strength and the subtleties, as you said. And the kind of themes to the surface, and you really kind of see the clever work that's been done with all the little subtleties all the way through this. But as well, those themes, when they are explored, like as we said, the loss of innocence, like the development of like Joel and Ellie, especially, like, this is one of these conversations that they have are really important for what happens later on as the story goes on. So yeah, for me, it sits at an 8. What it sets out to do, it does really well. And as you said, compared to other episodes, like, it's not the strongest of episodes, but what it does within itself as a self-contained episode is really, really good. And I think the next episode for me, the score will probably creep up, because there's a lot of great stuff that happens in the next episode too.
For sure.
But yeah, so that is our coverage of episode 4 of The Last of Us. And Joey, before we go, please do let everybody know where they can find you on socials.
You can find my personal pages on all social media platforms, particularly TikTok and Instagram, at Joey Dean Official. And you can also find my band, if you like alternative pop music, on all platforms at The King Vagabond. And you can also stream our music on Spotify and anywhere else you listen to music.
So there you go, everybody. Go and get all up in it. Go and get their music in your ears. So yes, this podcast, obviously, if you are just listening, every episode that we're recording, we also upload to YouTube, onto my YouTube account. So if you do want to watch us talk about it, you can go on there. But if not, we are available on all podcast platforms. So again, if you just type in Last Week On, you will find us on there. We are also available on all social media. So if you type in Last Week on Twitter, Instagram, you'll find the podcast there. If you want to follow me, myself, I am at Strawn87. Again, type that in Twitter, Instagram, you will see my face. So I just want to say, Joey, thank you again for coming through this journey with me. I'm really loving it. Episode 4 again, we're kind of creeping our way through now. And I'm just really excited to get to the end with you. This has been incredible.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, always. And until next time, everyone, take care.
Bye.